My next guest was an offensive force in the NFL, but lately he's decided to tackle something else: abortion. Ben Watson is a Super Bowl champion, a first-round pick, and an All-American football legend. A dominating force for the Patriots, Browns, Ravens, and Saints, he hung up his gear after 16 years in the league with 547 receptions and over 6,000 yards. But as incredible as Ben was on the field, he's done just as much off it, forming a foundation called One More to help people in need of opportunities and a good education. He's been a voice of reason on everything from racial tension to the unborn. And this year, he's the executive producer of a new documentary called Divided Hearts of America. Before we have our conversation with Ben, let's take a look at the preview.
When does a person get rights?
When does a person get rights? When a person is a person.
When is a person a person?
And that's the thing. When a child is born, then the child is a child.
If we look at the history of abortion laws, it's always been predicated on when a human's life begins.
There is no personhood under law for fetuses. We don't have that in this country.
The state legislature has passed the Reproductive Health Act.
They say that this law has made Illinois the abortion capital of the Midwest.
This is one of the worst possible choices that any woman and her family has to make.
The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable.
There's nothing more common sense than giving a child born the right to continue.
People were saying, wait a minute, do they really kill babies? I said, hey, it's called infanticide.
It's important that as African Americans that we truly understand the history of abortion.
In New York City, the home of Planned Parenthood, for decades more black babies have been aborted than born alive. For decades.
Abortion is targeting Black America. That's not an accident. That's genocide.
Ben Watson, that's some powerful stuff. And I've got to ask you this question. After retiring from the NFL, I'm sure you had a lot of options. Why did you decide to make a movie about abortion?
That's a great question. And why would this be my first attempt at film? Quite honestly, we were hoping that the film would come out a little bit earlier. It just so happened to come out because of delays like COVID and funding, everything else that goes on with film that I had no idea actually happened, but I learned about. We ended up releasing it a couple weeks ago. But I've always been someone, my wife and I have always been people who wanted to make a difference. And when it comes to abortion, we see this as a justice issue. We've been involved with so many other issues such as sex trafficking, supporting organizations that combat trafficking. We've been involved with racial injustice. We've been involved with poverty, homelessness, all those sorts of things that we consider to be justice issues, persecution overseas as well as here in the United States. And so for us, this is something that is defending the vulnerable. And we believe that being people that have voices and being those that can advocate, it's incumbent upon us to always stand for the most vulnerable among us. And we believe that is the child that is defenseless in the mother's womb, as well as advocating for the mother as she makes these decisions about life and death.
But this is this can be a controversial issue. I mean, there's easier issues. I mean, you mentioned human trafficking, an issue we work on, but that one is much more palatable, if you will. This is a tough issue.
It is tough, but it doesn't mean that we shy away from it. But it also means that we encourage people to engage with compassion and engage with conviction as well. And I think with the film, that's what we try to do. We try to set out to provide an opportunity to encourage civil discourse. Now, there's going to be emotion when it comes to this issue, and there should be. We're talking about life and death. This issue has been tied to politics probably since the late 70s, early 80s, when the pro-life terminology and pro-choice terminology came about. And so there is a an emotional part of this, as well there should be. But as people who want to care about life and say we care about life in all of its stages, from conception all the way to the grave, no matter what stage somebody's in, no matter what their ethnicity, we say all those things. We have to engage with the things that are very, very tough to talk about. And what happened, looking at this conversation, there is so much vitriol. There is so much conversation that is demeaning, that I wanted to help people hear the other side. Even if you don't agree, it's important that we're able to hear each other, because when we hear each other, we see the humanity in each other, then we can best see how we can serve and see how we can love each other to get people to want to protect and stand for life as well.
So true. I was having that conversation here at the Values Voter Summit with Dr. Ben Carson about that very issue. And in fact, I see Dr. Carson is in this movie. In fact, I see several familiar faces. How did you come about the 30-some individuals that you interviewed? What's the story behind that?
Well, one thing I learned was that there's a lot of cutting that goes on in editing when you make a film. We probably talked to even more than 30. And I sat there on most of the interviews and spoke to people for about an hour about their stories, about how abortion had touched their lives. I had to whittle it down to the film, but really we cast a wide net. I wanted to talk to people on both sides of the aisle. And also what I realized was that there's a lot of nuance in each side. Many people are far on one side, far on the other side, but there's a lot of people that think about this issue with a lot of complexity. And so I wanted to hear voices that were in academia. People like you mentioned, like Dr. Carson, who are in medicine, who have operated on babies in utero. I wanted to talk to people that were in legislature. So we spent time on Capitol Hill. We spoke to New York State senators. We went in the Capitol Hill, spoke to U.S. senators and congressmen and women. Wanted to speak to people that were in the faith community. That's obviously a large component, but for many people, faith is not a component when you talk about defending the unborn. I talk to people who are biologists who say, look, this is when life begins. I don't believe in God. That's not my thing. But from a scientific standpoint, this is where life begins. And so I believe we should stand here. And I spoke to people who worked in pregnancy centers, people who worked in abortion clinics, people who were on the pro-choice side that said, you know what, this is between a woman and her doctor, and that's how I feel. And I wanted to hear all of those because this is a journey. The pulse of America on this is we're obviously in a lot of different places, but I wanted to take a journey and listen and hear. I have my convictions, of course. I wanted to listen and hear from people in all different stages of life, people who have even survived abortions, and hear their stories on how abortion has impacted all of our lives and why it's such an important topic that we should be talking about.
Now, Ben Watson, you cannot have that many conversations with people and not say, wow, I didn't think of that before. I didn't know that. I mean, anything that struck you in this that you really learned through this process?
There were quite a few conversations. I mean, the impact that abortion has on men as well. And we never want to minimize the impact that it has on women and on children. But the family unit is the most basic building block of any healthy society. When the family unit is either torn apart from external factors or disintegrates from internal factors, whatever's going on with the family, that affects everyone. And when you talk about abortion, you're talking about a man that is involved too. Maybe a man paid for an abortion. Maybe a man was absent. And so he in essence, forced the mother of his child to go that route. I spoke to many men who had deep wounds that they were carrying because of their involvement with this issue. Also, when we talk about Roe v. Wade, I remember speaking to Peter Breen of Thomas More Society, and the idea is, attacking Roe v. Wade, and really part of the film is understanding this ramp up that we started to see in places like New York and then Alabama, and then Illinois and Georgia. And what he made a good point of saying was that even if Roe v. Wade is overturned, at some point, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, the state levels where the battles will be held.
Right.
And so all of us that are in our different states have to realize that there's work to do on this issue with our next door neighbors, with our local state governments, with the men and women that we come across every single day. There's important work to be done at the state level that may, in some respect, be more important than what happens at the Supreme Court level. So there were many things, but those were two that really stuck out to me.
Ben, let me ask you, bottom line, what do you hope to accomplish with this movie?
Bottom line, I hope to, again, facilitate and force civic discussion, civil discourse, understanding. I want people to come into the film and to learn. This documentary is not propaganda. I wanted this to be educational. I learned a lot. I wanted to learn about the history of abortion law in this country, but also the overarching history of where the ideas of abortion came from, how we got to this place, what's going to happen if we don't address this, what happens if we don't change course. I wanted to hear personal stories. I didn't want this to be rah-rah, although it can be that. But I want people to come in from all sides, whether they have deep convictions that are in the pro-life community or even deep convictions in the pro-choice community, and think about this issue differently than when they came in. And because of that, I believe that we can save lives. We can not only save lives of the unborn, but we can also protect, encourage, love the women who are making these decisions and the men, as I mentioned before. And also understanding that there are a lot of different factors that play into these decisions. I want to change culture. My wife and I, we live by Micah 6:8. Do justice, love kindness or mercy, and walk humbly with your God. We see this as a way for us to do justice. We see it as a way for us to love kindness and to walk humbly in doing what he has given us to do for this time.
Ben Watson, final question for you. One of the issues you bring out in this documentary is the fact that the Black community is targeted with abortion disproportionately. They're represented in these numbers. Is abortion racist?
We talk a lot about that, and many people know, I think by now, hopefully, even with Planned Parenthood making an admission about Margaret Sanger, that eugenics, the science or the act, the study of pruning or cleaning a racial group from the undesirables, is where Planned Parenthood, where the abortion industry started. And so there are racist origins. There are, even when we talk about people with disabilities or people that have mental illness, whatever it is, there are some sketchy and undesirable origins when it comes to abortion in America. That is 100% correct. And also when we talk about where many abortion clinics are placed, many of them, a disproportionate amount are placed within minority communities within walking distance, is what studies show. So there is a racism that is baked into the abortion industry. But with that, the abortion industry benefits from racism that is baked into a lot of other industries in our country. We cannot look at the housing segregation that has happened in our country from back then till now. We can't look at the criminal justice or the criminal legal system and look at inequities in sentencing there where disproportionately affects Black men. We can't look at the racial wealth gap, which has been built up over time and continues to be to go apart from each other, even though we're in 2020, because of so many systems that have been put in place. All those things, what I found, have driven these numbers when it comes to abortion. And so to answer your question, yes, there is racism in the abortion industry, but there is also the benefit the abortion industry is getting from many of the racism or racist policies or racist outcomes, I should say, that are happening to the Black community outside of the abortion industry. So they're all put into one. We can't address one without talking about all of them collectively and holistically if we really want to address this problem of abortion in the Black community. Abortion is the number one killer for anybody in the United States. Black, white, doesn't matter. 800,000 Americans, between 800,000 and 1 million over the last several years, every year. But especially disproportionately in the Black community. But we can't talk about that without addressing so many other issues.
Good point. Ben Watson, how can folks see this movie, Divided Hearts of America?
We are streaming on digital, which I didn't even know. I knew nothing about film coming into this, to be honest with you, but we are streaming on digital on salemnow.com. So salemnow.com, people go there and they will see our film. They can purchase it there for download. We'll be there for a limited amount of time. So I encourage anyone who wants to spend an hour and a half about a tough topic, but a very important topic, maybe to learn, maybe to get groups together and watch, whether it is in your living room or in your church or just by yourself. We can't stand by on the sidelines with this issue specifically, because I believe that this issue is really an indictment on America.
I would agree with you 100%. Ben Watson, thanks so much for joining us here at the Values Voter Summit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.